Hey everyone, and welcome back to season 5 of the So Cultured podcast. We are so happy to be back with season 5, and our brand new series is called Debunked. So this season, we are diving into the world of conspiracy theories, and we are asking if science can prove or disprove these conspiracy theories. So we are going to be covering topics like, was the moon landing faked? Are we living in a simulation? Are there microchips in vaccines? And is the Earth flat?
And although this series is called Debunked, we may or may not be able to debunk these very conspiracy theories. And the science might actually be the very thing that proves the conspiracy theory. So we'll provide the facts and you can deduce your conclusions.
And at the end of every episode, of course, me and Taz will tell you if we believe the conspiracy theory or not. And I feel like it's going to be really interesting because, Taz, you give me like hardcore scientists, like not very swayed by conspiracy theories. Whereas I am someone who, I love a conspiracy theory, and I'm not going to lie, like I get really into them, maybe only temporarily, but like I'm not going to lie, I'm easily convinced. So I think it'd be really interesting for us to give our opinions. And of course, we really want to hear your guys' thoughts after listening to the episodes. So we've decided that every week we are going to do a poll on our Instagram asking you guys what you think of the conspiracy theory. Do you believe it or not? So make sure that you're following us on Instagram so that you can take part in those polls every week, because we cannot wait to hear your guys' thoughts after each episode.
And as well as that, we are introducing a completely new laboratory. So every third week, we will be doing a question of the week, and we will be featuring on our Instagram a question, because you guys sometimes say you want to contribute to our laboratory stories, but you don't always have one. So we are going to be putting some questions out there to get maybe some of your juicy stories that might not be long enough for like a whole laboratory story. So we're really excited for that this season.
And with that, I think let's just get straight into our first episode. And of course, we are covering what is probably one of the most iconic sci-fi science-based conspiracy theories. And that is, did the US fake the moon landing or not? Let's get into it.
This is Debunked by the So Cultured podcast,
hosted by Liv and Taz, two girls exploring the world of science and tech, unfiltered.
This season, we're separating fact from fiction as we dive into the world's most controversial conspiracy theories by seeing if science can prove or disprove them.
And of course, we are still serving up the laboratory
because the STEM world is messier than you think.
Don't forget, all opinions are our own and all of our listener stories are alleged. Let's get into this week's episode of Debunked. Stanley Kubrick is celebrated as one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, with his 1968 masterpiece, 2001: A Space Odyssey, redefining the boundaries of science fiction. But what if Kubrick's connection to space doesn't end there? What if the very skills he used to create realistic depictions of space were enlisted in the biggest hoax in US history? You see, during the Cold War, the US and the Soviet Union were locked in a fierce space race, with NASA under intense pressure to land a man on the moon. Success wasn't just about science, it was about global dominance. But what if the mission was too risky? Could the US government have faked the moon landing? And could Kubrick have been involved? Well, some conspiracy theorists, and low-key me, think so, claiming Kubrick left behind cryptic clues in his films, like in Space Odyssey, and even in the most iconic horror film, my favourite film, The Shining.
I'm just going to go out on a limb and say I haven't really looked into this conspiracy theory much at all, because in my mind, it's just like, I don't know, I just haven't given any like thought to it. And I'm just like, I've just kind of palmed it off because I just think it sounds ridiculous that people think it's fake. But I've actually not done, like, I've not looked into it like at all. So you might convince, maybe you also might not. We'll see at the end, I guess.
The research for this took me on an emotional roller coaster, and I'm about to take you guys on this same emotional roller coaster, because 1 minute you're going to be believing it, then you're going to be like, no. So it really is an emotional roller coaster. So yeah, in today's episode, we are going to break down these claims using science.
I guess my question for like this whole thing is why would they even need to fake it? Like, where was this pressure coming from? Like, you mentioned the Russians and the US and a race, but like, is that enough for like
Mm-hmm.
you to fake it? That's my question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. So, well, as I said, the US and the Soviet Union were rivals during the Cold War, and they were fighting for global dominance in politics, military power, and like technology. And
Mm.
this competition extended into space, where both countries wanted to prove that they were like the best, they were the most superior by getting their men to the moon first. And the pressure really kicked in for the US when the Soviets launched Sputnik 1 in 1957, which I'm laughing because it was on our quiz in season 2. I don't know if anyone remembers, which was the world's first satellite. And the US were really shocked at this point because it proved that they were already way ahead of the US.
Mm.
And then in 1961, the Soviets struck again when they put the first human in space. And at this point, the US were sweating, and rumors were even going around that Russia were going to put nuclear weapons on the moon too when they got there. And that is when President JFK stepped in and gave his famous Apollo speech, basically where he just said they are going to land a man on the moon before the decade was over. And after years of failures and disasters, including the tragic Apollo 1 fire, Apollo 11 launched in July 1969, and Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon, planting the American flag and securing the ultimate Cold War flex.
I'm not gonna lie, I probably should have known when the first man like landed on the moon or like stepped on the moon and like when the rocket launched. But I've just noticed it says 1969 and that was 1 year after the film that you mentioned came out, the Space Odyssey film. So that is already sus.
Taz, you've got your conspiracy theory hat on already.
I
I love
know I've
this from you.
converted already, haven't I? I guess my question is as well, like, how did they go from being so far behind the Soviets, like you said, to suddenly pulling off like the most ambitious space mission in history and literally,
Mm.
like you say, just in time?
Yeah, that's exactly the problem that a lot of people had, and probably why this conspiracy theory was born. Some people literally could just not believe it. So they started digging, and the more they looked, the more anomalies they found. Some of these so called clues have become legendary in the world of conspiracy theories. So, take the flag, for example. It's probably the most famous one of them all. So, in the footage from the Apollo 11 landing, the American flag seems to move. It's rippling, or it looks like it's like waving, almost like it's caught in the wind. But here's the thing, scientifically, that should be impossible because the moon has no atmosphere, no air, no wind, and no weather. So, in theory, nothing should be able to make that flag move. And yet, in the footage, there it is, fluttering. So, for many skeptics, this was the first clue that the moon landing wasn't filmed on the lunar surface at all. Instead, they claim it came straight out of a Hollywood filming studio because the fact that the flag was moving, a lot of people think that it was due to like aircon in a filming studio.
I don't know how I feel about that because I don't know, like, I mean, I'm not well versed in space. Like, I don't know whether things can move or not move.
Well, it
Like,
shouldn't, no, like scientifically, it shouldn't be moving. Nothing, because it looks like it's blowing in the wind, and like that shouldn't happen. There's no air, no wind, no atmosphere on the moon. So,
I still feel like just the flag is a bit of a stretch.
okay. Well, if you feel like that, there's more. So let's get into some more anomalies. So
Okay.
let's talk about the missing stars. So if we go outside tonight and look up at the sky, we can obviously see stars, right? Even from here on Earth, where the atmosphere scatters light and it makes them less visible. Now, imagine that you're standing on the moon with no atmosphere to block or scatter the light. The stars should appear brighter, sharper, and there should be far more than anything we've ever seen from Earth. But in every single Apollo photo, the sky is just a deep black void. There is not a single star in any of the photos, any of the videos. And it's not just the photos or the videos. So during the Apollo 11 press conference, when the astronauts were asked what the stars looked like, their answers were like a bit vague, and honestly, they kind of like almost sounded a bit rehearsed. So they said that they didn't really like, this was literally what they said: we didn't really notice the stars. And I just think that's a bit odd, right? Because if you're standing on the moon, wouldn't the stars be one of the most breathtaking sights?
Yeah, surely you would. Like you would take it all in, wouldn't you? Like you'd be like, wow, I'm the first man on the moon. I'm looking around, like taking it all
Mm-hmm.
in. Like I remember when I literally you can go to Scotland sometimes and get like in the middle of
Yeah.
nowhere because there's no like, what's it called? Light
Pollution,
pollution.
like, yeah.
And so then you can see like really clear sky, and I would even notice that. You'd be like, wow, the
Mm-hmm.
sky looks so clear. So I think that's just like human nature, surely. Like to be
Yeah.
stepping onto the moon, you would definitely notice the
Mm-hmm.
stars. So yeah, that is a little bit sus.
And Taz, here is where it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
The astronauts actually relied on the stars to navigate to the moon. So obviously there's no GPS in space, right? You can't just like pull up your Apple Maps, like get me to the moon. So Apollo missions used a method called celestial navigation, which is a system that dates back to ancient sailors, but was adapted with modern technology. So the Apollo spacecraft was equipped with a special sextant like telescope and an optical sensor designed to identify specific stars. So, by locking onto a pair of known stars, the astronauts could actually measure the angles between the stars and their position relative to the Earth, the moon, or the spacecraft itself. And these angular measurements were then kind of like fed into the spacecraft's onboard computer, which used them to calculate the spacecraft's precise position in three-dimensional space. And this was crucial because even a tiny error in trajectory, just like a fraction of a degree, could send the spacecraft or the rocket hundreds of kilometers off course, which would literally make it impossible, number one, to reach the moon, and number two, to return to Earth safely. So, in essence, the stars acted as like a fixed reference point in space, which allowed the astronauts to verify and adjust their course with extreme precision. So without this system, navigating their way around space accurately literally would have been impossible. So here's my question: is if NASA trusted stars to guide them all the way through space to the moon, why did the astronauts claim that they didn't even notice them when they were standing on the moon?
Yeah, that's a good point. But maybe they were looking at the stars so much through this telescope that they were just kind of over it by the time they got to the moon. They were like, why would we notice the stars? Why we're literally like jumping on the moon, like defying gravity.
Yeah, but there's nothing
Defying
to look at. There's
gravity.
Yeah, but you're just like you're in. There's nothing else to look at. Do you know what I mean? And on Earth, we've got trees. We've got that. There's so much around us to look at, but on the Earth, on the moon, it's just.
I guess another question as well in my head is why obviously stars is such an obvious thing to be in the sky. So if they were like fabricating it, why would they leave the stars out? It would make the
Mm.
photos look more realistic if they left them in, no?
So here's the thing: some people believe that NASA actually purposely excluded the stars from all of the Apollo footage, like the photos and the videos, in order to, and this actually makes so much sense, in order to prevent astronomers from analyzing their positions and calculating the precise time and location that the pictures were taken. So here's the science behind that claim. So every star in the night sky has a fixed position relative to Earth's rotation and orbital movement, a concept known as celestial mechanics. And these positions are mapped with incredible precision in star catalogues, which record the exact coordinates of stars relative to Earth at specific times. So, if a photo was genuinely taken from the moon and you can see the stars visible in the image would perfectly align with the celestial sphere as seen from the moon's location at that specific date and time. So essentially, like people could verify if it was like taken at the time that they said it was, the date that it was, and where it was, right? However, accurately recreating this star pattern in a studio would have been an extraordinary challenge. So, like, even the slightest error in the position of a single star, whether it was part of a constellation or like a visible planet or just like a background star, would create inconsistencies. Astronomers could then use the photo to determine whether the star positions match the known celestial map for July the 20th, 1969 at 3 p.m. UTC, right? So conspiracy theorists argue that the reason that they left them out, it wasn't like an oversight or just like NASA are that dumb that they're just like, oh yeah, we're just like making up these photos and we forgot to add the stars. Like some people think it was a deliberate strategy to prevent astronomers from cross-referencing celestial positions. And if true, this would mean that NASA didn't just fake the moon landing, they actually meticulously accounted for one of the most rigorous scientific methods of validation to cover their tracks.
Well, I think that
and
would
then they
make
would blame it on the
sense.
camera settings. Because that's what they say, like, oh, it's because of the camera
That's
settings.
what I was
But
going to say, though, because we're talking about 1969. What kind of camera is going to be going into space, filming the first man on the moon? Like, it's going to be rubbish. Like, surely it's not going to be able to detect the stars in the sky like it are. On the flip side of that, if you are going to fake the moon landing, you're gonna be meticulous about it, aren't you? Like you're not gonna do a botched job, so you would remove the stars.
Well, there might be some other reasons for the lack of stars, which we'll get into in just a second.
Okay, so is there anything about the photos that were had more like weird inconsistencies, or was it just the stars and the flags?
No, Taz. We are just getting started. So I want to talk next about the background terrain and the shadows in the Apollo photos, because this is actually where things get even weirder. So like, let's say you and me are stood in the Lake District, right? We take a photo of you and me. There's mountains in the background, yeah? Similar thing in the Apollo photos, but the backgrounds, no matter like where they're taken, even if they're taken kilometers apart, the background looks the exact same. And you can actually get two of the photos, put them together, and it literally looks the exact same, even though they're supposedly taken kilometers apart. And this raises a really important scientific question, which is how could the same background appear in photos taken at such different locations on the moon? On Earth, perspective changes dramatically when you move like even small distances due to parallax. This is the apparent shift in the position of distant objects relative to closer one. And parallax is less noticeable on the moon because there's no atmospheric haze to interfere, but it should still cause measurable changes in the appearance of distant hills when viewed from different locations. Yet in the Apollo photos, the backgrounds appear almost unchanged. And for conspiracy theorists, this suggests that the same backdrop may have been reused in the studio, a technique common in studio productions where the same set is used to simulate different environments. So basically, people think this is evidence that they were in a Hollywood studio. But that's not all. Let's move on to the shadows. So on the moon, sunlight should behave in a very predictable way. So obviously there's no atmosphere to scatter or diffuse the light like there is here on Earth. So shadows should run parallel to one another and align consistently based on the sun's position in the sky, because the sun is the only source of light on the moon, right? Like they don't have artificial light, they don't have mirrors that are reflecting light or anything like that. But in multiple Apollo photos, shadows appear to diverge, intersect, and even in some cases form right angles. Now, using basic principles of optics and shadow geometry, we know that on a flat surface illuminated by a single point light source, like the sun on the moon, all shadows should maintain parallel trajectories. So they should all run parallel. But conflicting shadow angles suggest one of two possibilities. Either the ground surface is uneven, causing the shadows to distort, or there are multiple light sources present. And obviously, conspiracy theories like the idea of the latter because it suggests it could have been filmed in a studio set. And here is where things again get even weirder. Shadows at divergent angles are characteristic of studio lighting setups where directional lights are placed at different positions to control how objects are illuminated. For example, in a studio set, you'll have like a key light and then a backlight. And there is the photo of the infamous helmet reflection. So in one of the most closely analyzed Apollo images, and this is also one of the most famous things from like whether the moon landing was fake or not, so you guys will probably know about it, but there is a reflection in an astronaut's gold-coated helmet, which appears to show basically like 3 little dots, which people say looks exactly like studio lighting. So people argue that this is direct evidence of studio lighting in the reflection of the helmet, and that is just one of the reasons, like that alone is the reason that so many people think the moon landing was fake.
Yeah, but is there not like lights on the like thing that landed on the moon? Surely there would be like floodlights on it.
I don't think so, no. Because it's so bright on the moon. There's no atmosphere. The sun, like, it's so bright. You don't need light sources.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of assumed that the moon would be dark.
No, you have like the dark side of the moon and then you have the light side of the moon. Because there's also the whole conspiracy theory about we don't know what's on the dark side of the moon. And people think that there's like some alien bases on the dark side of the moon, which again, listen, I'm gonna get to at the end because it is part of this conspiracy theory. But yeah, that's like a whole conspiracy theory in itself.
I don't know if I'm as convinced by the light source, because obviously the terrain would have been uneven, like so. And also, I'm more convinced by the stars. I feel like if they were meticulous and went to the extent of like removing the stars from the pictures, then like they wouldn't be dumb enough to like leave light sources in. I don't know.
Okay.
So, is there any like scientific explanation for like any of what you've said so far?
Taz, I love how this is what I said at the start of this episode. Like, you are the better scientist, because I, at this point, like doing this research, I was ready to accept, like, okay, the moon landing is fake. Like, I was fully convinced, because I even, for the listeners, I text Taz and I was like, the moon landing's fake. And then like 10 minutes later, I'm texting her back again and I'm like, it's real. And then I was like, it's fake again. So I really went on an emotional roller coaster. But actually, what I realized is that all of these points that I've just told you guys about can be easily explained by science. So let's start with the flag. So on the moon, there is no atmosphere, like I said. So there is no wind to make the flag move. And this was a reason that people were like, right, it's fake. However, when the astronauts planted the flag, they obviously had to twist the pole into the lunar soil to secure it, right? This motion transferred energy to the flag, which is what caused it to ripple. And here is the key point here. Without an atmosphere, there is no air resistance to dampen the movement. So on Earth, a flag would obviously quickly stop moving because air molecules push against it, creating a drag. But on the moon, there is no such resistance. And so the ripples continued much longer than they would on Earth. Easily debunked, right? Next, the missing stars. Let's get into this. So, first, to cut a long story short, it had a lot to do, like I said earlier. Well, this is what NASA said. It had a lot to do with the camera settings. But there's also another factor, the moon's surface itself. So, lunar regolith, the fine dust that covers the moon, has a really high reflectivity when exposed to direct sunlight. So the regolith reflects sunlight so strongly that it creates additional brightness in the scene, which further washes out faint light sources like the stars. So some people say it's not, or NASA say, it's not that the stars weren't there, it's just that the cameras couldn't detect them under those conditions, and that there were other light sources that made it even harder for the cameras to pick up the stars in the background.
Yeah, and also their cameras just can't have been that good in like 1969. So I kind of agree with that. But the flag I'm still a bit iffy about. Like the residual energy, I'm a bit like, oh.
Yeah. I'm here with you, to be honest, Taz, I can't lie.
Okay, so how about the background?
Yeah, let's get onto the background. So, like I said earlier, on Earth, we have an atmosphere, and atmospheric scattering creates haze, which makes distant objects appear fainter and blurrier the further away that they are. So, like, you know, for example, I'm talking about like the Lake District. The reason that we can tell that the mountains are like far away is because of this atmospheric scattering. Like, it helps us actually with depth perception in outdoor environments. Now, on the moon, because there is a lack of, like, well, there's no atmosphere, this means that distant objects appear just as sharp and as clear as those nearby, which I feel like must be so trippy. And it makes it difficult to judge like true distance. So what actually seems like the same hill in different photos is actually terrain visible from various different angles often tens of kilometers away. And finally, let's talk about the shadows. So the explanation lies in optics and lunar topography. So shadows cast on uneven terrain, such as the moon's cratered and rigid surface, can appear to intersect or diverge depending on the angle of the surface. So when light strikes a slope, for example, it creates different or complex shadow patterns that can deviate from the expected parallel alignment, even though there's only one light source, the sun.
Yeah, I- I'm in a bit of like, I don't know. These conspiracy theories, they really do get you. They really they have an answer for everything. And like some of the things you said there, I'm like, yeah, that's a good scientific explanation. But like the flag, I'm absolutely still not convinced. But
Yeah.
it seems too unreal that like something as big as the moon landing would be fake.
Let's carry on because there's some more things that we need to cover. Because listen, I understand why like all of these anomalies in the photos and the footage, like I can accept the explanations, but there's still a few things that I just cannot shake and I can't scientifically understand. And the first one is the Van Allen radiation belts. So, for anyone who doesn't know, the Van Allen belts are zones of intense radiation that surround the Earth, and they're created by charged particles trapped by the Earth's magnetic field. So there are two distinct belts, the inner belt, which is closest to Earth, and this is the most dangerous zone, filled with energetic protons that can penetrate spacecraft and cause serious radiation damage to both electronics and obviously also humans. And then the outer belt, which is mostly made up of high energy electrons. And these are still dangerous, but they don't penetrate as deeply as protons.
That's really interesting because obviously, like, radiation is like super, I don't know, fatal to humans. So, how would a human go through these Van Allen belts without like having serious complications or dying?
Yeah, no, it's a valid question. And also, like, how did spacecraft? Because it would also damage the spacecraft as well. So, unlike modern space missions, which stay safely within low Earth orbit, where Earth's magnetic field offers protection from like most radiation, the Apollo missions and any missions that wanted to go to like Mars, for example, and I just don't know how I didn't know this before, but they have no choice but to go straight through the Van Allen belts. And here is where things get even more confusing. So, NASA has said that before we can send humans to Mars or deeper into space, we need to develop technology to pass safely through these belts, which
So they saying that they didn't have that technology in
mhm.
1969.
Yes, this is a question that raises so many eyebrows and literally made me think, well, what the hell, haven't you already made it? Like, what are you talking about? NASA has actually claimed that the technology used during the Apollo missions to pass through the radiation belts was destroyed and
Oh
it
my
cannot be
gosh.
rebuilt. Like, think about that. If we had the ability to protect astronauts from intense radiation more than 50 years ago, why would we suddenly need to reinvent it today? Like, especially when we have more advanced materials, better engineering, and cutting edge science. And what makes this even harder to wrap your head around is the choice of materials used for shielding. To block the level of radiation found in the Van Allen belts effectively, you need really dense materials like lead. But here's the problem: lead is, if anybody knows, it's incredibly heavy, and if the Apollo spacecraft had been equipped with enough lead to provide like the adequate amount of protection that it needed, it actually would have been far too heavy to even ever launch. And rockets obviously have very strict weight limits because every extra kilogram requires way more fuel to make it lift off. Instead, the Apollo command module, get this, was shielded with a thin layer of aluminum foil, which is great for spacecraft construction because obviously it's very light, but it's not nearly as effective at blocking radiation as something denser like lead. And NASA's reasoning was that the spacecraft's speed and trajectory would minimize the astronauts' exposure, so heavy shielding from the radiation apparently wasn't necessary.
Okay, so that's actually crazy. Aluminium foil to shield them from deadly radiation. That's kind of
Mm-hmm.
crazy. But when you've been saying this, like to me, it doesn't make sense that they said that like the technology got destroyed. I think that they never had the technology in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Firstly, but then they didn't want to like discredit their reputation by saying that they didn't have it, and then
Mm-hmm.
by default they purposely put if it was real, right, they purposely put the astronauts in harm's way
Yeah.
just for the pure purpose of, like, being the first person on the moon. Like, and that's, like, comes with ethical problems, right? So they're not gonna
Mm.
admit that, I feel like. That's what I'm
Yeah,
thinking.
100%. No, that's actually a really like important point that I didn't really think about is yeah, like were they actually sure that the foil was going to be enough protection? And maybe they just didn't care because they just wanted to get there so quick. Like yeah, 100%. But also, if we solved the radiation problem with foil back in the 1960s, why would NASA say that we need new technology to tackle the same issue today? Do you know what I mean?
Well, there's no race now. We're not in a Cold War with Soviet Union, so
This is true, but some people say it's because NASA never went to the moon, but instead they just called Hollywood. So let's step away from the science just for a moment because we've done a lot of science. And I want us to dive into one of the most infamous moon landing conspiracy theories because I think it's so interesting. And this is the idea that obviously I've hinted at this that they didn't just fake the moon landing, but they actually enlisted one of Hollywood's most brilliant filmmakers, Stanley Kubrick, to do it. So, according to theorists, NASA approached Kubrick after being impressed by his groundbreaking visuals in 2001: A Space Odyssey, and conspiracy theorists claim that Kubrick's ability to recreate the conditions of space so convincingly made him the perfect candidate to direct the supposed moon landing footage. Now, another key claim is that Kubrick actually had access to classified NASA technology while he was working on his film A Space Odyssey, including a special 50mm Zeiss lens. And this lens was originally developed for photographing dimly lit environments during the Apollo program. So, conspiracy theorists believe Kubrick used this lens to create the stunning visuals of 2001: A Space Odyssey and also the alleged Apollo footage. But the story does not end there, so maybe you're not convinced, but there's more to it. Some theorists argue that Kubrick later left hidden clues about his involvement in the moon landing hoax in his films, most famously the iconic horror film The Shining, which was released in 1980. And if you guys haven't seen The Shining, it is actually the best horror film you will ever watch in your life. Like if you're a horror film enthusiast, you've definitely seen it. But for example, Danny, the child in the film, he actually wears a sweater with Apollo 11 displayed on the sweater, which theorists interpret as a reference to the moon landing. Then there's the infamous room 237. This room in the film is like just like not haunted, but this room in the film is because it's set in a hotel, and this room is like there's just a lot of problems in there. And the fact that the room was room 237 is often frequently cited as another clue because in the original novel written by Stephen King, the original room was actually numbered 217, but Kubrick changed it to 237 for some reason. And conspiracy theorists argue that it wasn't a random decision because at the time that the film was actually like produced, the distance between the Earth and the Moon was believed to be approximately 237,000 miles. So why did he change it from 217 to 237? And there was finally one key scene that conspiracy theorists focus on, which is where the camera focuses in on the female lead and she's reading a page from a typewriter, showing a particular phrase written out over and over again. It says, "All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy." But the word all is deliberately, I'm doing quotes here for anyone listening, deliberately printed as A11, which they interpret as a hidden reference to Apollo
I've
11.
actually never seen The Shining, which might be
Oh my
quite
God.
controversial.
You've seen the scene where it's like, here's Johnny, that scene.
Yeah.
Here's Johnny.
Yeah,
And he
yeah,
like
yeah.
bursts through. Yeah, that's from The Shining.
Yeah, I'll have to watch it because I quite like scary films, so I'll make sure to watch it and try and look out for these
Hmm.
references. But I'm gonna be maybe devil's advocate here. But as like a filmmaker, if I knew this in the back of my mind, I would purposely leave nuggets like this so people were talking about my film. Do you know what I mean?
That is a very good point. It is a very good point. Yeah. And also, some people just say, like, he loved space. So it made sense that there was like, the kid was wearing an Apollo 11 sweater because he loved space.
And also, this isn't really related to the film, but like if NASA managed to keep it a secret this whole time, like so many people, I mean, how many people worked on the Apollo program? Surely someone would have leaked some kind of proof, or 𝗂𝘃𝗀 said something by now.
Yeah, that is very true. And that is one of the strongest arguments against the moon landing hoax. Conspiracy theorists argue that the answer lies in compartmentalization. So most people working on Apollo had very specific roles, like designing engines. Maybe you were building a suit, maybe you were writing software, and they wouldn't have seen the full picture. So if NASA staged the moon landing, only a small, tightly controlled group, like astronauts, officials, and like a handful of insiders would have actually known the truth. And everybody else was like fully convinced they actually were working on Apollo 11. And honestly, the US government really does have a track record of keeping secrets. Just look at MK Ultra, the CIA's mind control experiments. Like, they stayed hidden for decades. So is it really impossible that they could have just done the same with the moon landing? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not the first time they've hid something. Again, this is the last time I'm going to say this because I'm going to end it here, but this again is where things get even wilder, and I'm giving you like a lead on to a whole nother conspiracy theory. But in 2001, a former Air Force engineer called 𝗂𝘃𝗲𝗀𝗯𝗁 came forward and he said that in the 1960s, while he was working on classified NASA projects, he saw top secret images of structures on the far side of the moon. According to him, NASA had airbrushed out evidence of buildings that couldn't have been naturally formed. And he described what looks like a lunar base, seemingly built by intelligent life. And there's an even darker twist. So in 2018, after he spoke out about this, 𝗂𝘃𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀 died in a sudden accident. Officially, he was hit by a car while riding his bike, but for conspiracy theorists, his death was far too convenient. And they claim he was silenced just as his story started gaining attention. So, was 𝗂𝘃𝗀𝗀𝗀 telling the truth, or was he silenced to keep his claims from spreading? I mean, when you add up the missing moon missions and the secrecy around early lunar photos, you do start to wonder, maybe we did go to the moon, but what else did NASA discover up there? What's really interesting is that it's not just NASA anymore. So private companies like SpaceX and others are gearing up for lunar missions of their own. So who knows? Maybe they'll uncover something that NASA couldn't or wouldn't tell us. Okay, so Taz, very quickly, what do you think? Moon landing, fake or not?
I mean, I don't want to believe that is fake, but I can understand the reasons for faking it. Like the motivation behind the US wanting to fake it. And like some of the ways that they handled things and the way that they explain like
Certain things.
abnormalities just seems a bit off for me. I mean, like I feel like there's
Yeah.
lies mixed in with truth. The truth is
I
that they
agree.
did go to the moon, but then there was like maybe there were fabricated photos. Maybe they did go to the moon, but like aspects of the photos were fabricated.
I'm with you. Like, I actually think they went. But I think there's something else to the story, and like what that is, I don't know. But yeah. So for our listeners, firstly, we really hope you enjoyed this first episode of Debunked. And like we said at the start of this episode, we are going to put a poll on our Instagram this week. So make sure you're following us because we really want to know, after listening to this episode, what do you guys think? Do you think the moon landing was faked or not? But that rounds up the first episode of Debunked, and I'm already so excited for next week's episode. So Taz, can you let us know what we're going to be covering next week?
Yeah, so next week we are going to be covering the lab leak hypothesis. So did SARS-CoV-2 come from a lab? We'll
my
find
god,
out.
you're literally the perfect girl to do this episode. Like, I'm so excited. But for now, we are moving on to our first laboratory of this season, and we have missed reading your guys' emails, so we are so excited. So let's get into the first listener story of season 5. Okay, let's be honest, reading academic papers is a struggle.
Yeah, for sure. Some of them feel like they're written specifically to make sure that no one actually understands them.
That's actually so true. That's how I feel like every time I read a paper. I'm just like, did you even want me to understand this? Because honestly, sometimes I don't know. Like, I feel like they always have tiny text, never-ending jargon. Like, there's just so many unnecessary words in there. And also, somehow, I swear every sentence is like a paragraph long. And that is why we love using Audemic. So instead of spending hours decoding research papers, you can just listen to them like a podcast, exactly like this one, but for academic knowledge.
Yeah, it's honestly a game changer because you can speed up playback, highlight key sections whilst you listen, and even take notes all in one place. And the best part is it's not a robotic voice. You actually get natural human sounding narration, which makes research sound way more engaging.
I also just can't help but think how much time this would have saved me during my PhD. Like, I remember sitting there at my desk for hours reading papers over and over again. And now I'm just thinking, if I had Audemic back then, I could have just read them while I was driving, while I was on the train, even like while I was in the gym or like cleaning my room.
Yeah, exactly. I remember I used to listen to so many audiobooks in my car to work. Imagine if they were just, could just be able to listen to academic papers instead in like a podcast form.
Yeah, so basically it makes researching or learning faster, easier, and way less painful. And if you want to try it out, Audemic offers a 7-day free trial, so you can test it for yourself completely free. And we also have a discount code that will pop on screen now so that you can get some money off. And of course, we'll pop the link to Audemic in today's episode or video description.
And with that, let's get back to the episode. So it starts off by saying, a lab romance is ruining my life. So, a fellow PhD student is in a romantic relationship with the postdoc that is our supervisor. And I think it might have been one of the contributing factors to wrecking my mental health. So in my lab, our professor usually supervises in terms of like the big picture and the research direction. And every PhD student has a postdoc supervising them more kind of day to day. I came in as an international student, and another girl who was previously a master's student in the lab started her PhD at the same time as me. And we have the same postdoc supervising us since we work on similar subjects. From the start, it was evident that they're either very friendly or actually a couple. They bring lunch for each other, go on vacations and weekend trips together, and share one room on group retreats and conference trips. It's definitely a couple.
100%. They couldn't make it any more obvious for you guys.
It's kind of an unspoken, not so secret that everybody knows about. The postdoc is helpful enough that he spent plenty of time helping me get started in the lab and always answers my questions. And I always thought whatever relationship they have is their business. But after 3 years and some pretty bad mental health and lots of therapy, I've realized I don't actually get the same supervision as his partner. They always talk about her project. He's very involved in giving advice and even doing some data analysis for her. And he helps promote her at conferences, introducing her to people. And I never get unsolicited advice or just check-ins from him. I feel like unless I'm asking direct questions, he doesn't care about me, and it doesn't feel entirely fair. Also, at the moment, I feel very lonely and isolated in the lab. I self-isolated for some time due to depression, and it's getting better with antidepressants now, but it seems the lab culture to eat lunch together and stuff like that has completely died off for some reason. Everyone at lunch eats at their desk, and I can barely talk to anyone. I'm still extremely insecure about myself. And now my colleague, the PhD student in the relationship with my supervisor, barely acknowledges that I exist. She doesn't say hi or goodbye back when I greet her in the morning or when I go home. I feel like all these awkward group dynamics are making it hard for me to have a healthy relationship with work and improve my mental health.
That's a lot.
Yeah, that is a lot. And to be honest, I completely get it.
100%. I feel like it's reminding me of the my lab is a cult story time. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's very, very similar to that. But I don't know. Let's start with the relationship because, firstly, sorry, not so secret. This is definitely not secret. Like, surely, or maybe it's just like in that particular lab group it's not so secret, but in the wider department it's secret. I don't know, but yeah, they're 100% like obviously in a
100% in a
relationship,
relationship.
which obviously is giving him a, what's the word I'm looking for,
Conflict
giving
of
her,
interest.
yes,
Oh,
conflict of interest. So I 100% validate you and believe you when you say he is giving her more attention and supervision than you. 100%. I've been there in jobs when I think my supervisor isn't paying any attention to me, or like, do you
yeah.
know what I mean? And I start to think, am I just going crazy? Maybe I'm too needy. Maybe I'm not cut out for academia and I need to be better at
Mm-hmm.
working independently.
Yeah.
But absolutely not. And also I
However,
think if you think you're mature enough to have a relationship with someone that you work, absolutely, that's fine, there's no problems. But then you need to be mature enough to set boundaries between you guys at work and
yeah.
still work at a professional level.
You think like your relationship, if you're going to have a relationship with, like, I guess, in a way that's going to be a conflict of interest, you need to make sure that it kind of is a secret. Do you know what I mean? Like, people, it's not obvious to people that you are
Yeah.
together in a
Yeah.
way that so that everyone is treated fairly. Like, I know people who have been in relationships in the lab, and at work you would not even
Yeah,
think that
same.
they were in a relationship because,
Yeah.
like, there's just no kind of, like, relationship dynamic there.
Yeah, they're very
Um,
professional.
but I completely get what she's saying about, like, unfair treatment. I think I've said it on the podcast before. My supervisor was not in a relationship with anyone, um, but he definitely treated me and another PhD student very differently. I
You.
believe there was, like, underlying misogyny there because the PhD student I worked with was male and my supervisor
Mm-hmm.
was male. Maybe they had more in common from that respect, but, like, yeah, it was just very different. I've got so many crazy stories about, like, that sort of stuff. But I was kind of, like, left to my own devices. Whenever I brought results, I was, like, quite stringently questioned
Mm-hmm.
about it. Whereas, like, my PhD student friend was not, like, it was just completely different vibes. And it really does, like, affect your mental health. And just a PhD in itself really takes its toll on your mental health, to be
Mm-hmm.
honest. Like, they were dark times. So I can
Yeah, I
understand
mean,
why this is like a compounding factor.
so how did you deal with it? Was you just like, fuck it, I've just got to put up with it, like there's nothing I can do? Or did you try and talk to them about it? Would you say there's any point in trying to talk about it? I don't know, because I think one thing that we have to establish is like, is there a base level of supervision, right? Like
Mm,
everybody deserves a base level of supervision that really is like the bare minimum. And if you've got that, good. I mean, it's very annoying that he's given this other person like extra support and extra supervision. But if that relationship didn't exist, like, do you feel you would get it? Does that make any sense? Like, is she
yeah,
losing out on anything by this other relationship
yeah.
existing or not? And then, like, if there's not a base level of supervision that's met, like, there are probably procedures that you can follow. Like, you can 100%. In my office, there's a few people who were in similar situations, minus the relationship part, who went to the head of school and discussed this with them and then literally asked for a second supervisor.
Yeah, I would honestly think, like, also adding to, like, the supervisor dynamic that I had, the PhD student who, like, he was my friend, to be fair, like, very good friend, to be, like, working together all the time. But his mum was also in science research, like, very
Mm-hmm.
established in science research. So not only did he have very good supervisor, but he also had his mum that he could turn to if he any ever had, like, a
Yeah.
scientific question. And I guess I just kind of understood that these were the cards that I'd been dealt, right? And a lot of people in science do get very minimal supervision, right? But I think what you can do, like, if our listeners listening, what I would advise you to do is to reach out to people, because even if it's not that postdoc necessarily, you can reach out to other people in the lab, because a lot of the time people are quite
Mm-hmm.
willing to help. Like, I know someone was to reach out to me, like a PhD student was to reach out to me, ask for some kind of mentorship, I'd definitely be willing to help. So
Yeah.
if you're
Oh,
not
people love
getting
to
help,
help.
yeah, if you're not getting help in like some areas from a particular postdoc, then don't be afraid to look elsewhere and like ask for like some kind of mentorship. Might not be official, or you might request to make
Mm-hmm.
it official if they are particularly helpful. Like I would don't try not isolate yourself, because a PhD is isolating anyway.
Mm,
So
yeah.
I would definitely try and put yourself out there and like seek help from elsewhere.
Yeah. And also, like, I'll be cautious giving this advice because I know you said, like, it's affecting your mental health. So I think this is going to be, like, really up to your discretion if you think this is something number one that you want to do, and something number two that, like, you should do in terms of, are you going to benefit from it at all? Which is, can you talk to your supervisor? Like, is the relationship there that you can go to them and say, like, look, hey, I know you've been really supportive, you've helped me with XYZ. However, I have noticed that, like, you've been giving this other person this extra support, this extra help in these different ways, and I wondered if it's possible that you could do the same for me. Or maybe when you guys meet, I could join in, we could have like some wider lab meetings rather than individual meetings. I'd really love to hear these discussions that you guys are having. So, like, can you insert yourself
Mm,
in that dynamic? Do you know what I
yeah.
mean? Because if they're having professional work-based conversations, which they should be, then what's the problem with you being there? And it's easier for the supervisor anyway, right? Because one big lab meeting is easier than individual meetings. That also might help with the problem of like morale and teamwork and
Mhm.
getting on with people in the lab if you see them more often. Because in my PhD, we used to have lab meetings every single week, and over time I got really close with everybody else in the lab group because I spent that 1 or 2 hours with them every single week. So I feel like that could help you in several ways, but like I said, it's up to you if you feel like that's going to benefit you to, quote unquote, confront the supervisor about it. But yeah, if not, there's other options. Like, you can 100% ask for another supervisor. That's
Mm,
totally something that you could
yeah,
do.
that is a great idea, Liv.
Thanks. I have good advice sometimes, I think. But yeah, and then in terms of like friendliness, I think it's a two-way street. And I think often what you might find is that the other people in your lab are feeling the exact same. So maybe why don't you try and initiate something? And if they say no, they say no. Like, cool, move on with your life. Like, you've lost nothing. But if you try and they say yes, and you guys have a really nice lunch, and then you make friends, then you've gained something. Sometimes you just have to be the first one to take the step and put yourself out there. And if they say no, then fuck them. Like, it is what it is. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's plenty of other places in your life to make friends. Like, you don't need, controversial, but you don't need friends at work. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I also think like if you're just there to do your PhD, like there's always other opportunities in different labs, and it's always good to switch up as well. So you don't
Mm.
have to stay where you are as well.
Yeah,
One thing
100%.
I would say as well is, as always with this laboratory, is that we only see like the story that you put in, and like we don't really know the like result of us giving our advice. But our DMs are always open for things like this
Hmm.
as well, if you ever want advice outside the podcast. So there's that as well.
Yeah.
And in saying that, if you do want to submit your own laboratory, we'll always leave an anonymous link in the description. And if you want to reach out to us, you can find us on Instagram at soculturedpodcast as well.
Yeah, and with that, that wraps up episode 1 of season 5, Debunked. So we will see you guys next week, where we're going to be covering the lab leak hypothesis. We hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to follow us on whatever platform you're listening on. If you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And we will see you guys next week. Bye, everyone.